you've become lost. It's much later than you thought, and you realize it's time to leave the gathering for the night, or perhaps morning by this hour, and make your way home. Like so many of us, in enjoying the festivities of the odd celebratory evening, you've become caught up in conversation with dearly missed and long unseen friends for much longer than you had planned. Perhaps thanks to one too many beverages and stayed far past the hour you'd intended. After a round of cheerful goodbyes and well wishes, you don your favorite coat and hat, and you depart the home and hearth and warm tidings of good friends, out into the cold and dark night on your journey home. A friend had driven you to the get-together, as it was in a part of town where you have never been before. In catching up and sharing stories on the ride over, you hadn't paid attention to the route your friend took, as can happen when you're excited and an area is unfamiliar, and your mind drifts from one focus on conversation to another. This was no issue though, as your friend, departing early, had assured you a half-dozen times that you could easily walk back to your neighborhood should you care to stay late. You had pulled your phone and briefly scanned the route back home. A long but manageable walk, you thought, and sent your friend off on the way with a warm farewell. But now, as you make your way in the direction you believe is homeward in this late hour, you feel less optimistic about your decision, but it was what you chose, and you had a wonderful evening, so you try to make the best of the walk. You produce your phone from your pocket to verify that you are going in the proper direction, and you notice that your phone's battery is at less than a quarter capacity. You hadn't charged it in hours after all. No worries though, because you have a good general idea of the route, and you're a grown adult, and people did just fine finding their way before the age of smartphones, and you're thoroughly capable of doing so, you reason, and you reason further that it's a perfectly pleasant night, and it would be unreasonable not to try to enjoy your walk. Reasoning is a sort of privilege, isn't it? It's a benefit afforded only, if you think about it, to those with the privilege of bystanding and far removed. It's a simple matter indeed, to think of reasonable solutions to problems you've heard about, but with which you have not dealt. Rationalization, on the other hand, is no privilege, but an act of desperation. Rationalization is to hear a bump in the night, and to seek comfort in all of the preposterous things that you know, with certainty, could not have bumped as you heard. Funny though, that you often find yourself rationalizing when something unreasonable happens. In some sense, truly, rationalization is the comfort you take in whittling pieces that don't quite fit to line up with slots for which they weren't quite made, in just such a jury-rigged way that it will hold up for now. But you don't need to rationalize all that frequently, do you now? After all, life has generally granted you and yours the sturdy walls and warm hearth and kind friends and good cheer that keep those bumps of the night at bay, hasn't it? Perhaps it is imperfect, but it'll more than suffice most times, you'll find. However, every now and again you find yourself in a place where rationalizing must do, and as anyone who has traversed such paths will attest, his whereabouts are dark. Rationalization is a lantern in the black of the unknown, illuminating and penetrating through it for the bearer to clearly see that which is imminently before them. But a lantern is also a beacon into the dark, isn't it? For it is upon your lantern that all of the eyes of the unknown collectively turn their focus, staring back from the darkness. You shouldn't think such dark things, you rationalize. No need to help the dark path unnerve you any more than it already does. You glance around in favor of situational awareness and notice the form of a little dog strolling along casually and carefree. Off in the distance behind you, he seems to be headed in the same direction as you, and you find some repose in his quasi-company. He's far enough behind you that you can't make out any specifics of his appearance, nor can you attain whether he's even noticed you, but the bounce of his walk appears playful, so you don't pay him much thought. You turn your attention dutifully back to the path ahead with pep in your step, and allow the still fading buzz of ample drink and great conversations from the evening to wash over you. The night air is crisp, and the ambient hums of insects and distant traffic fills your ears as you allow your mind to stroll and wander. A sudden commotion in the bushes off to your side startles you, pulling your thoughts away from some sunny, indistinct daydream and back, acutely and vividly, to the dark and unfamiliar pathway on which you walk. You pivot towards the sound, halting in your tracks, and after an unsatisfying few moments of silence as you wait to be snatched, you exhale a sigh of uneasy relief. Probably some small, scampering creature of the night, you rationalize, more afraid of you than you of it, and you resume walking, your stride having quickened, of course. Need to keep up the situational awareness, you remind yourself, glancing around. The little dog from earlier is still distantly trailing you, though as before, in a sort of bee-like path and casual manner, so you still can't be certain he's following you per se. And yet, the comfort he had brought you earlier has, now you notice, been replaced with a shaky unease. You return your gaze forward, now walking with an intentional speed. True, you didn't take your sweet time loitering around to study this dog, though he looked a little less, little than before, didn't he? Hold your horses, though. Your pulse is racing, and you know that you're likely working yourself up over nothing. You had gotten a better look at him earlier, you decide. He's harmless. Perhaps it's merely that the ruckus in the bush had spooked you, and that your thighs are beginning to ache, and that you are walking alone on a dark path down an unfamiliar street. But you can't quite shake the foreboding, nagging feeling of unease. The dog had seemed a welcome if inadvertent companion before, but now you just feel alone, out with him. The alcoholic buzz from earlier having completely faded, you become acutely cognizant of your hearing, now razor sharp thanks to your shaken nerves. The sounds of distant traffic can no longer be heard, nor can the quiet hiss of nighttime insects that filled your ears only just recently. Or how recently, now that you think about it. You're a bit more tired than you realized, and your dully aching legs indicate you've been walking for quite a while. You produce your phone, and after first becoming blinded by the bright glow of the screen, you scan the map, confirming that you're still on course before your phone finally gives in to its lack of charge and powers down. It's at its fill, apparently. You'll need to take its word for where you are, though, you think as you resurvey your dark, ever unfamiliar surroundings. Best to stay situationally aware, remember, as you continue onward. The gathering at your friend's was uptown, and you live clear on the far side of downtown. This is true. But your friend must have lived a slight bit further up than uptown, you decide, because you have been walking for a while. You could be in better shape, sure, but you're no invalid. Only the very longest walk would make your feet ache as they do. Moreover, you notice that the buildings you have been passing lately are becoming fewer and farther between, and those you do come upon each seem darker and, dare you say, less inhabited than the last, less familiar. You should have brought a wristwatch, you think, as you have no meaningful way of gauging your progress. You feel that this just can't be right, that perhaps somewhere back you took the wrong path, but the map said the way was straight ahead, and you're certain you've not changed direction or deviated without it say so. So this must be the way. Still, the street signs you do come across, nearly as infrequently as the buildings, read names of no meaning to you. Now you can't help but wonder, are you certain you followed the route? A thin, cold rain starts to fall in a lazy drizzle. You hadn't even noticed clouds, and the pleasant coolness from earlier is now supplanted by a piercing briskness. Walking on, you realize that though the air of ominous unfamiliarity grows, as the blackness yawns, circumscribing you, you cannot turn back, for you do not remember the way. Up ahead, just a bit under a tall, ragged tree, you notice a relatively inviting flat, dry rock and decide to rest for a few moments, if only to let your feet catch up to you and you appraise your surroundings. There are no structures in sight, only gnarled trees of claws with their shadows playing tricks to give them the appearance of having faces. Skull-like maws locked in a scream, perhaps in warning. The rain continues in an intermittent drizzle so light and faint that it is silent. You sigh, and the tiny whisper you produce is piercingly loud by relief, startling you slightly and rendering you painfully aware that you are surrounded by silence and darkness. A stranger in a strange land, and without a familiar or hospitable sight since you can remember. No, you reckon there's no more point in denying it to yourself, in prolonging an inevitable realization, because there's no escaping it. You've become lost. A faint pit path off in the distance rests you from your momentary uneasy daze. Though the source is hard to pinpoint, you're fairly sure it seems to be approaching. The dog from earlier? Whatever it is, you feel a pit form in your stomach, as the fine hairs on the nape of your neck begin to prickle on end. Movement from your periphery steals your vision off the path, out into the dark past the tree line towards its source. Your eyes dart from side to side, having trouble making anything out in the near pitch blackness, but you swear you can see the outline of a dog-like shape. You still can't quite make out the details, but as you strain, staring off into the night, you begin to have this sinking realization that he is no small dog. Is that even the same dog? It can't be, you feel, but then again, you never did get a good look at him before. No matter, you decide, it feels wrong. You hastily stand and resume walking, now with haste. What else can you do? Careful now, you realize you don't want to run. You must keep your wits about you and resist everything in you telling you to run. To where would you run? Nothing's chasing you until you break and run. Until you scamper, you rationalize. Nothing's chasing you until you make it real by running away. Nothing's chasing you. You're now almost certain you're going the wrong way. There has been nothing but unbroken woods for what you feel has been miles, and you wish desperately to turn back and return to where there were at least buildings, no matter how dark, at least street signs, no matter how unfamiliar. But you know that you can't turn back. No, that ship has sailed, because you still hear it off in the woods behind you, even as you try to ignore it, that pit-pat of something that you want nothing less than to meet. When you slow down, the pit-pat keeps pace and draws closer, so you speed up. When you pick up speed, rushing as quickly as you can muster until you are forced to slow and catch your breath, it catches up, pit-patting with a stubborn deliberation that makes it all the more disturbing. You try to keep a consistent pace, but your unease grows. The pit-patting, somewhere just beyond the trees, is the only thing you hear besides your own breath, and your ever more hectic steps, it seems to be growing. Not approaching necessarily, but what had sounded like a dog-sized pit-pat earlier now sounds bear-sized, or larger. You can't be sure, as you've been straining so very hard to listen out into the cavernous darkness that your ears are beginning to deceive you. So maybe your mind. No, your resolve, grasping for some meager agency. Something is following you, and it's no dog. But no, you declare no further. Where are you even going at this point? You're lost. L-O-S-T. And you're just becoming more lost with each step. You don't even know what's chasing you, but you do know that if you just turn around and backtrack long enough, you will return to some sort of civilization. You know this. It's certain, so you turn back. And why keep saying chasing, you wonder? No, you rationalize you have no concrete evidence that you're being chased, or even followed for that matter, so you are not. Besides, you haven't heard the pit-patting for a little while now. Perhaps you were just letting your wits get ahead of you. With newfound confidence and a fresh, promising plan, you quicken your stride. You cover miles with much more ease than when you'd first come this way, fueled by the hope that your ordeal is soon to be over. Upon arrival at the first building, any building, no matter how dark and unfamiliar looking, you decide that you'll knock loudly and boomingly on the door, like you've never knocked before, and you'll continue until you find some soul, anybody. They'll likely be angry at first, having been woken at this hour, you acknowledge, but surely once you explain things, they'll be eager to help. All you really need is a phone after all. But where are these buildings and dark houses? Certainly, you should have found one by now. Without intent at first, you begin to jog, desperate to break out from these woods and to see signs of others, of anyone in the world. You bolt, sprinting until you are forced to slow back to a walk, gasping still with no buildings to be seen. No, in fact, you notice the path seems to be narrowing, now no wider than an arm's length across. This is impossible, you realize. This is the way you came. There have been no intersections since you could remember, so you must be going back the proper way. Your hopes are dashed when the trail finally becomes so narrow that it ends, with a single defiant tree standing in the would-be center. There's nowhere to go, and you sit down on the wet ground unsure what to do next. Then you hear it. The pitter-patter is back, and drawing nearer, coming from behind you, you turn around. Just as you begin to make out a silhouette just beyond the tree line, approaching you from the woods, it breaks into a run, darting straight for you. You had become lost, but it has found you again. Your dear friends will gather again in warm quarters, and they will once again share drink and good cheer, and the home and the hearth, and they will talk of missing you as they reminisce, sharing cherished stories of your times together. They will express mutual exasperated confusion and frustration over your perplexing disappearance, and lament about how they only just recently saw you, or so it seems. Perhaps they'll ponder your fate, and speculate as to what ghostly, ghastly ends befell you. Perhaps they'll even wonder if you just faded away. After all, they'll agree, your walk home that night was a bit long, sure, but manageable, and so your friends will laugh and cheer and joke, and have a few too many drinks, and stay laughing and celebrating far past the hour they'd intended, and following a few jolly goodbyes, heartfelt well wishes, and politely declined offers for a ride home. A few of them will don their favorite coats and hats, and they will depart the home and hearth and warm tidings of good friends, out into the cold and dark night on a journey home, and a few of those who do will become lost.